Everyone knows the scary dinosaurs. T-Rex, the king. Velociraptor, the cunning pack hunter, made famous by a certain film. Spinosaurus, the river monster. These are the celebrities of the prehistoric world, the ones on every lunchbox and movie poster. And they've earned their fame. But here's the thing about fame. It's not the same as being the most interesting, or the most surprising, or frankly, the most unsettling. Because for every famous dinosaur, there are dozens that almost nobody has heard of. And some of them have stories so strange and lived in places so unexpected that when you finally learn about them, they lodge in your mind far more deeply than any T-Rex ever could. And today I want to introduce you to one of them, a genuine apex predator, one of the very first of the truly large meat-eating dinosaurs that ruled its world nearly 200 million years ago. A creature with a face so bizarre it earned a nickname from a rock and roll legend. And, here's the part that gets me, it lived in the single last place on Earth you would ever expect to find a dinosaur. It lived in Antarctica. This is Cryolophosaurus, and it might just be the scariest dinosaur you've never heard of. Now, let's deal with that Antarctica part first, because it's the detail that stops everyone in their tracks. When we picture Antarctica, we picture the most hostile environment on the planet, a frozen white wasteland, months of total darkness, temperatures that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. The idea of a large, active, warm-blooded predator thriving there sounds impossible. And today, it would be. But Cryolophosaurus didn't live in today's Antarctica. It lived in the Early Jurassic, around 190 million years ago. And back then, the world was a completely different place. Antarctica wasn't sitting alone at the bottom of the globe, buried under miles of ice. It was part of the great supercontinent, connected to the other land masses, and, crucially, the entire planet was far warmer, a lush greenhouse world with no polar ice caps at all. So the Antarctica that Cryolophosaurus stalked was not a frozen desert. It was a forest. A cool, temperate, seasonal woodland of conifers and ferns, threaded with rivers, teeming with life. Think less South Pole, more Pacific Northwest. Though I don't want to oversell the paradise, because there was one thing even Jurassic Antarctica couldn't escape: its latitude. It still sat far to the south, which meant that even in that warmer world, it endured long, dark polar winters, months where the sun barely rose. So any animal living there had to be tough, adaptable, and able to cope with real seasonal hardship. And that already tells you something about Cryolophosaurus. This was not a soft animal. It was a predator hardy enough to rule a polar forest through the long dark. And the fact that we found it there at all rewrote our understanding of where dinosaurs could live, proving that even in the earliest days of the age of dinosaurs, they had already spread to and conquered the ends of the earth. So that's where. Now let's talk about what. Because Cryolophosaurus, as an animal, is remarkable in its own right, quite apart from its address. It was a theropod, a member of the great lineage of two-legged, meat-eating dinosaurs that would eventually produce T-Rex. But Cryolophosaurus came long before T-Rex. Nearly 120 million years before, in fact. It belongs to the very early days of that dynasty, and it holds a special place. It's one of the earliest large theropods we know of, and the oldest member of a more advanced group called the Tetaneurans, the branch that leads onward to the giant predators of later ages. In other words, Cryolophosaurus is close to the root of the whole story of big predatory dinosaurs. It was a pioneer, one of the first of its kind to get big. And big is the word. Estimates put it at somewhere around 6 to 7 meters long, roughly 20 feet or more, and standing tall on powerful hind legs. Now, that's not T-Rex size. It's a mid to large predator by the standards of the whole Mesozoic. But you have to judge an animal by its own world. And in its world, in early Jurassic Antarctica, Cryolophosaurus was the undisputed apex predator. The biggest, most dangerous hunter in its entire ecosystem. Nothing on that continent could challenge it. It sat at the very top of the food chain, and everything else lived in fear of it. It hunted the plant eaters of its forest, including the long-necked prosauropods, the early relatives of the giant sauropods. And it did so with a mouthful of sharp, curved, serrated teeth built for the classic theropod job of slicing through flesh. So it was big, it was the apex predator, and it lived in Antarctica. Any one of those would make it interesting, but we haven't even gotten to the strangest part yet. Because sitting on top of this fearsome predator's head was one of the most bizarre pieces of anatomy in the entire dinosaur world. A crest. But not a simple crest, running front to back like most dinosaur crests do. Cryolophosaurus had a tall, thin, bony crest that ran sideways, crossing the top of its skull from ear to ear, sitting just above and behind the eyes, perpendicular to the snout. And it was wrinkled and fanned and ornate. And when the first reconstructions showed it, everyone had the same reaction, because it looked, unmistakably, like a pompadour. Like a fabulous, swept-up quiff of hair, which is exactly why this terrifying Antarctic apex predator ended up with the most undignified nickname in all of paleontology. The scientists and the public alike started calling it Elvisaurus, after Elvis Presley. Because this 200-million-year-old killing machine looked like it had styled its hair for a rock concert. In fact, the animal's formal name, Cryolophosaurus, means cold-crested lizard, the cold for its frozen homeland, the crest for that ridiculous, wonderful headpiece. Now, here's a question worth asking, and it's the honest one. What was the crest actually for? The answer is almost certainly not a weapon. That's the key point. The crest was thin, delicate, made of fragile bone. It would have shattered if the animal tried to headbutt or fight with it. So it wasn't for combat. Instead, paleontologists are confident it was for display. Just like a peacock's tail, or a deer's antlers, or the crest of a modern bird, Cryolophosaurus's flamboyant headpiece was almost certainly a social signal, a way to show off to potential mates, to intimidate rivals, to say, "Look at me, look how magnificent and healthy I am." Which means this monster wasn't wearing that crest to hunt, it was wearing it to impress. There's something wonderful in that. The most fearsome animal on an entire continent, and evolution gave it a fabulous hairdo purely for the purpose of looking good. Vanity, it turns out, is very, very old. And I think that combination is exactly why Cryolophosaurus deserves to be far more famous than it is. Because it defies every lazy assumption we make about the prehistoric world. We assume dinosaurs were tropical. This one ruled a polar forest. We assume the scary ones were the famous ones. This one is an obscure early Jurassic predator most people have never heard of. We assume a terrifying apex hunter would look grim and functional. This one strutted around with a pompadour on its head. It's a reminder that the deep past was stranger, richer, and more surprising than the handful of celebrity dinosaurs we all grew up with could ever suggest. And there's one more thing worth sitting with, because it speaks to how much is still out there. Cryolophosaurus is known from very few specimens. Antarctica is, for obvious reasons, one of the hardest places on the planet to hunt for fossils. Every dig, there is a brutal, expensive, dangerous expedition into ice and rock, chasing the buried remains of that lost green world. And yet, even from the little we've recovered, we've found a giant predator with a rock star crest, which raises a genuinely thrilling thought. What else is down there? An entire Jurassic ecosystem, its predators, its prey, its strange experiments, lies frozen beneath the Antarctic ice, almost entirely unexplored. Cryolophosaurus may be the scariest dinosaur you've never heard of, but it is almost certainly not the last one waiting under the ice to surprise us. So the next time someone asks you to name a scary dinosaur and you're tempted to say T-Rex, consider instead telling them about the 20-foot apex predator that ruled a forest at the bottom of the world 200 million years ago, with a fabulous pompadour on its head and nothing on the entire continent brave enough to challenge it. The famous dinosaurs are famous for good reasons, but the ones nobody talks about, sometimes those are the ones that stay with you. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep looking up.